recovery is of course very important, but you cannot stop at that level. You have to, go ahead from paradigm. So in this polycrisis, when there is war, when there is climate crisis, when there is energy crisis, so how do you want to fix your fiscal policy? Now, then there is widening current account deficit. If the central bank, governor now deciding that they are going towards a low interest rate regime, that can affect the capital, the foreign capital formation. In this sense, the interest rate differential is the money will respond to the countries where the interest rate is high. And as I mentioned earlier, the Western world is the interest rate not lower, it's mounting. So unless we keep the interest rates high, then there will be the industry differentials and there will be capital flight because the money will go to the country in which there is a high interest rate. That is the hot money. Hot money always responds to the countries where interest rates are high. Can't do anything related to the interest rate in India because we are keeping it at 0.5. Of course, central bank governor has articulated that he is taking a pause, but that is not the peak rate, but it is that's the way the central bank governor articulated about the interest rate. Now, this got its own implications on the fiscal policy front. In the sense, the public debt management is going costlier. So if you look into the fiscal risk, if you look into the debt servicing burden, that is, that can be captured into the interest rates, interest payments as a percentage of the revenue received. Like the total revenue you earn, what is the percentage of that which is going towards debt servicing? That is your interest payment. If that ratio is quite huge, then you are crowding out, that within the expenditure, which the revenue expenditure, if a huge sum is going for the debt servicing, you are crowding out, that interest payments and the other expenditure within the revenue expenditure front. You're just crowding out. So what to do regarding controlling this debt servicing burden, especially when the interest is mounting. Now, within this limited resources, what you can articulate or what you can do within this limited fiscal space, you have a question that you will invest on capital formation and capital formation, or you will invest your money in the infrastructure investment. So there is a kind of a consensus that when the interest rate is going higher, when the public debt management is getting costlier, the limited fiscal space, you just invest that on infrastructure, public infrastructure, so that it will crowd in private investment. So that's the way. Now, there is a huge pressure for the countries to perform, to reduce the fiscal risk and to perform in terms of fiscal rules, in the sense we have to articulate that our country's fiscal deficit is not more than 3% of GDP because the credit rating agencies are on watch. And that, is very crucial because the investment, the private investment otherwise will suffer because the investors will not come to our country. The macroeconomic fundamentals are not strong. So it's a kind of, vicious circle. Like on one side, interest rate is mounting. On other side, fiscal policy needs kept accommodative in the sense that if it is not kept accommodative, it will affect the overall growth recovery process because the growth recovery is mainly now from the fiscal space or the fiscal point of view, not from the monetary point of view, because they are going hawkish to control three things. One is the capital flight. The second is they have to control the global inflation, mounting inflation. Otherwise, you get into the negative interest rate regime. And what exactly is the negative interest rate regime? You have nominal rate and inflationary expectations for inflation. And real interest rate is nominal interest rate minus inflation. So if the real interest rate is negative, but inflation is above, the nominal interest rate, then your real interest rate will be negative. When you are getting into negative interest rate contract, then what will happen? You just imagine your savings. You will not get what you have put in the bank, right? If the interest rates are negative. So that's a big issue. Then our the central bank governor articulated that he's going on a hawkish mode. So his main concern was to tackle this negative interest rate. And he articulated in the press conference that worried about the negative interest and the interest, this anchor of the repo rate is 4% and not 6%. And he made it explicit because he wanted to tackle the negative interest. And what is this nominal anchor? In India, when we look into the monetary policy framework, every country needs to articulate an inflation anchor. That inflation needs not cross a particular anchor. And in our country, like it is 4%, yes, it is 4%. So in different countries, that nominal anchor for inflation is 4%. So up to 4% officially can tolerate inflation. But again, we articulated on a band. Band is the sense plus or minus 2, like up to 6% it's okay to have inflation. And after that, we are out of the comfort zone. But now, Shaktikan Das has articulated that we need to take that narrative back to 4%, otherwise we will get into the negative interest rate regime. So that's challenging. Like on one side, you would just describe yourself as the RBI governor. On one side, your challenges are related to mounting inflation, cancellation of savings, otherwise you get into the negative interest rate regime. Your capital is getting flighty. So when these things happen, you need to keep the interest rate high. But what is the repercussion on the other side? The public debt management is getting costlier. Okay, because interest payments, when the interest rate go higher, your debt servicing is getting costlier. Now, if you look into the economic growth recovery process, that's also getting affected because for the economic growth recovery process, you need to keep the interest rates at a lower rate so that you can do investments at a very comfortable rate of interest. Because interest rates and investment, there's an inverse relationship. So interest rate needs to be lower for investment pickup. So it is affecting the growth recovery process. So you are in a dilemma, and you can talk to me when I open the floor that had you been the chief of the central bank, then what decision you have taken? If you go on a hawkish mode by keeping the interest rate high, or you will consider a pause or a decrease in the interest rate so that the growth recovery process can happen. So these are the challenges, when we talk about the central bank. Now, I talked about, the fiscal policy challenges in the sense to keep that fiscal policy accommodating, provided, this monetary policy is going hawkish. So we need to keep the fiscal policy accommodating. Then what will happen? Like your debt will mount, your deficit will mount. So beyond a point, you can't do that because you have a deficit threshold in your country that is 3% of GDP. So finance minister's job is also very tough against this backdrop of poly crisis. So now the articulation is that can't even think of a strict 3% fiscal deficit coming back to that original fiscal rule, because if we do that, we need to do an expenditure compression. So as finance minister, you visualize, will you go for an expenditure reduction this moment? To do that, it will affect the human capital formation in your country and it affect the fiscal infrastructure. So then you need to articulate that I'm keeping my fiscal policy accommodated by linking it to the capex formation, because that is going to revive your economy, economic growth, because the investment and the growth, there is a link to it. So that's the way, Nirmala Sitharaman, the subnational Brahman. Yeah.
ആരെങ്കിലും റിപ്ലൈ അയച്ചു നീ കണ്ടു അല്ലേ കണ്ട്
Okay. Okay. So let's go ahead. So that's the way it happened. Like we need to keep the fiscal policy accommodative so that it will support the growth recovery process. Now, let's unpack this concern. You need to keep the fiscal policy accommodative by keeping the you need to check. In a sense, this 3% can be attained through tax buoyancy path and revenue expenditure compression path. So which path you follow? That a finance minister needs to take a call. And if you're taking a path like you are going to collect the revenue, revenue mobilization, and through the tax buoyancy path, we are going to attain that 3% of GDP, the fiscal deficit. I don't have any quarrel with that. But in the post-pandemic era, in the time of COVID crisis, the revenues are uncertain. When the revenues are uncertain, to reach that 3% of GDP can happen only to control your expenditure. But expenditure cost that has humanitarian crisis, and that can lead to humanitarian crisis in the post-pandemic. That can also lead to a slowing down of the economic growth recovery process. So what you do? You need to maintain it at 3%, then you have to improve your revenue. Now, he invented something else. He asked the state government, the subnational government, that go ahead, 3.5% of GDP, your fiscal deficit. But only one thing you need to do right now is that extra borrowing space at 0.5 to just link it to structural reform. Because in the post-pandemic or in the polycrisis period, structural reforms are very crucial. So you link that extra 0.5 to the structural reform, then you will be fine. And the structural reform is linked to the power sector reform. Like if a state undergo power sector reform, and if they come into that financial efficiency parameters, then the state can have the 0.5 extra borrowing space. Now, how many states are willing to, or how many states are performing, like controlling this financial and operational efficiency parameters related to this structural of the sector, the power sector? Looking at that, the data is available in the Ministry of Power website. You can take a look into the dashboard on the financial parameters, the efficiency, measured in terms of the tariff revision, reducing the aggregate technical and commercial loss, reducing the gap between the cost and the revenue, so they are not getting into the negative, content. Now the financial efficiency parameters related to the power sector. On the operational efficiency parameters, you have to get into the power infrastructure. What are the important power infrastructure reforms you need to undertake in the state? And you get a state-wise comparison. That's how the states are performing in terms of the efficiency parameters in the power sector. But this articulation of linking the fiscal rules to the structural reform, or the fiscal consolidation to the structural
Sorry, Lekha, I think there is a hand raised by Niharika. Niharika?
Ma'am, your audio clarity
is going. Audio is actually not. Yeah, in between the audio was not very clear. Maybe when you little go away from the phone, probably it's kind of.
Yeah. Okay. Is it better, Niharika? Is it better?
No, it's the same.
It's the same. Okay.
Arjun also raised it. I mean, sometimes we feel it's a kind of, some terms are also kind of, they have to really closely watch it to understand the terms, but they are not able to hear that, I think. How do we manage it?
Okay.
Maybe you can go a little slow. Let's see how this is working. Let's see. Can you go a little slow? Yeah.
Sure.
Probably, let's see.
So I was talking about the structural reforms related to the power sector. Now it's clear, Niharika and Arjun? No? My voice is not clear right now?
Agaja, tell me.
I think it's the same.
Is it clear now?
Hello, sir.
Arjun,
tell me. Tell us.
Sir.
It's clear.
Wireless earpods that might increase the quality of the voice that is coming in.
Uh, uh, Amit,
Okay. So, is it okay right now?
yeah, this is better, I think.
Better. Okay. Okay.
Yes, sir. Yes.
This is better. Okay. Let's do it then.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, I was talking about the economic growth of a country. It has got two important components. One is that structural component, and the other is the cyclical component. So, structure in the sense, if you look at the GDP, it has got a trend component and the cyclicality. So, when you get into the monetary and fiscal policy mode to correct the cyclicality, that is a short term in nature, then you are not correcting the process completely. You need to look into the structural reforms. That's why I mentioned about the power sector, because the power sector reforms are related to the structural reforms. You can take a look into the paper by Geeta Gopinath. She explained that the cycle is trend. Like in the sense, you studied about business cycles in the class. Like the economy has got business cycles. So I mentioned about the policies by the government and the policies by the central bank. They act as a counter-cyclical policy tool. Like when the economy is in recession, counter-cyclical means you keep your interest rate lower or you pump prime. More expenditure is, you do the pump priming so that the economy will go or the grow fast. But when the economy is in an upturn, then you can think about raising the interest rate and just take back the debt pump priming you have done. Little bit of an expenditure constraint or restraint. So that's the way this counter-cyclical policy that works. But this counter-cyclical policy tool, in the time of post-pandemic, after the crisis, it was not working quite well because in the context of the emerging countries like India, this believing that there is a business cycle itself is problematic because after the crisis, the economy has come down. It is a permanent scar rather than a temporary, downturn. If it's a temporary thing, then the moment the fiscal and monetary policies do a triggering, it will go back to the original pre-pandemic, or pre-pandemic growth path. But that's not happening. The reason is that we need to look into this question as permanent scar. It's a permanent downturn. Then the structural issues are very important, and the government they have started articulating about the structural reform. That's why you have to do this 2+2=4 right now. That's why I mentioned earlier that the fiscal consolidation is very closely correlated to this structural reforms that is focusing that extra 0.5% on the power sector. Now we need to plug in the new areas of concern, which I mentioned in the first part of the lecture. Those new areas of concern are climate change crisis, that related risk and uncertainty. Now again, there is a tug of war between the monetary policy and the fiscal policy authority. Like, I'm again asking the question, like, think a moment that you are the central bank chief. I'm asking you to take care of the climate change related risk and uncertainty. How do you do that? Climate change risk and uncertainties is a political economy question. So then, getting into political economic question means you are getting into the reputation risk. Like you don't have any enough tools with the central bank to tackle this climate change related risk and uncertainties. So then you put the ball into the fiscal policy realm. So the fiscal policy makers, they announced that, okay, we will do a climate responsive budgeting. We will do ecological fiscal transfer by transferring the money to the subnational governments so that they can tackle the energy crisis or the climate change related risk and uncertainties. So that's the way it is happening right now. The monetary policy is a little shy to take it up, the climate change related issues. Now, if you ask me that not even a single country, from the monetary policy front got into this climate change related crisis, then my answer is, of course, there are countries like what do you call it? The ECB, the European Central Bank, chief, the Christine Lagarde. She was the IMF managing director. She is quite committed to the climate change related risk and uncertainties and to articulate the monetary policy front. In the sense, the greening of monetary policy, that was given huge emphasis in the policies related to this monetary policy stance within the ECB, the European Central Bank. And if you look into the Bank of England, they are also quite vocal about the climate change concerns. But are we ready to get into this question? All what I understood is within this liquidity guidance, within that, the RBI has a statutory liquidity ratio. The banks, the commercial banks, they have to keep a certain portion of their assets with the central bank as per this statutory liquidity ratio. That's the way they have done. After that, they can lend money, the credit they can do, and then there is a priority sector lending which is 40%. And RBI, what they have done within this priority sector lending, a portion was tied to the green infrastructure project. So that's a way that greening of monetary policy in a limited scale we have undertaken. How the climate change concerns were addressed by the fiscal policy authorities within the financing pattern of deficit, because we do predominantly the monetary, not the monetary financing, the bond financing. So within the bond financing, a portion of the financing of deficit is made thematic and it is linked to the climate bonds or the climate financing. So we have climate bonds right now, and 2 years back, this was announced by Nirmala Sitharaman in her budget speech. So we have climate bonds. It's a kind of a thematic bond. These are the ways in which we address the climate change concerns, like the way we did the greening of monetary policy by incorporating the green element into the priority sector lending. We have done ecological fiscal transfers in the sense that the money devolved from the center to the state, that IGST, the governmental fiscal transfers, that's based on a scientific formula. So we incorporated one criteria related to the climate change, that is a forest cover, and devolved the funds down. We call it as ecological fiscal transfer. Now we also articulated within the financing pattern of deficit, we are incorporating the climate bonds. So these are the different ways in which we have incorporated the climate change related concerns like risk and uncertainty. Now, what we have to do is we have to make things transparent, like how much a country is spending on climate change. If I am asked, I should have a statement if I am the finance minister. So the scholars have started looking into the budget documents. We have a lot of demand for grants for each sector. So we need to apply a lens, that green lens, and need to ask the question, how much the country is spending on adaptation, mitigation, loss and damages. So then we come up with a number. And NIPFP, where I work, before this COP27 in Egypt, we were asked to do that exercise. Because that time, 1 year back, that was the first time we put forward national adaptation communication. So then it was very important to look into the question how much a country is spending on the climate change related risk and uncertainty. So we came up with around a number like 5% of GDP. So based on that, it is projected like in future how much the country requires to spend on the climate change related commitment. So that transparency is very important for an accountability process. So these are the ways in which we get into this new issue. Then another new issue is we are going digital. Is it good or bad? We have a lot of artificial intelligence and related, changes happening in the world. So are we ready? Whether that will widen inequality, whether that will do a replacement in the labor market. So these are the questions, and there are concerns. Like when we think about the labor market, of course, on one side, the fastest and smartest way to develop your GDP is to get the labor force, the army of force, which is untapped in the economy, by running the employer of last resort policy. But after a point of time, when there is automation and when there is this artificial intelligence getting, important, when the technological revolution happens, question, whether that's replacing the labor. Of course, it will affect certain sectors. Of course, it will widen the inequalities between the developed world and the developing world just because the infrastructure constraints are there. So are we ready? Our infrastructure is not ready. These are the concerns, and it will create some sort of repercussions, especially in the emerging economies. And we need to, because we can't say no to AI, but we need to get ready to skill. That skilling is required to face these new challenges. Now, going digital also includes in this crypto. In the era of the money and finance transformation, now there are a lot of transformations or a lot of innovations that happened in the area of money and finance. We know that over the years. But now the crypto, it's a high risk and high return asset. And I know some of you have already started investing in crypto. And I have met many Turkish students and the students from the Christ University, Lavasa, they started in investing in crypto. But the question is, what is the regulatory mechanism? In the G20 meeting, we articulated that the major global issues are going to be debt restructuring, regulations of crypto, climate crisis, energy crisis. So these are the questions like we are talking when it comes to the multilateral, that economic diplomacy. From that point of view, we start articulating about these issues. So when I talk about the global economic headwinds or the global economic challenges, that includes, of course, the war, it includes energy crisis, it includes the climate change related crisis, and also this digital. We are going to, it's not exactly a cashless economy or anything, but we are going a little, into the, uncharted realms like crypto, the CBDC, the central bank digital currency. So these are the challenges which we need to look into. So solid crisis means it is not equal to climate crisis alone. It is a complex crisis, and the fiscal and monetary policy authorities need to look into by keeping the policy accommodated. Because we can't get into a neutral stance right now because it will affect the economic growth recovery process, especially in a post-pandemic and the crisis-filled, poly-crisis-filled world. And I stop here because we need to have some questions. The floor is open, and you can ask me questions. It's already 7:40. We have little time for question answers. Go ahead. I need to know your concerns. Go ahead. If you are,
Can you go ahead asking questions, everybody?
Yeah.
If you have not understood any term, also you can ask her. Or if you think that, these are not the major concerns that India is facing, or there is something else, you can ask her. Please.
I don't see any hands, but Hari can moderate, no?
Yeah. I don't see any hands yet. Anybody, please raise your questions.
Any questions related to
Yeah.
this monetary
Ramit.
policy? Yeah, sure. Go
Ramit.
ahead.
Yeah.
Good evening, ma'am. Am I audible?
Yeah, you are.
Thank you for the information and the wonderful talk. Ma'am, I just want to ask, do we have any data for the clean energy that is affecting our economy? Let's say the EV vehicles or the energy from the solar power generation. Do we have the data for that, or do we have any deductions from that?
This is a very specific question related to the data concerns. Of course, we have data. You can write to me because as a part of this JET, JET means Just Energy Transition Partnership. India has started articulating about these issues you have raised right now, going, to EV, getting into the energy transition mode. So we have particular data, but unlike Vietnam or Indonesia or South Africa, we have not yet committed. India has not yet committed to the JETP, that Just Energy Transition Partnership. But of course, we have data, and if you're keen in working on this area, then of course, I can lead to those data concerns of yours. But I think you are quite convinced about this energy transition, which we need to be looked into from this fiscal transition, perspective as well. As it's a peculiar question related to data, I think we can do it one to one, and we give space to your friends to ask some other questions. You can write to me. I'm Lekha Chakraborty at gmail.com. Okay, you sent me a mail that what data exactly you're looking for. You have a term paper related to this, or it's just
They have they have assignments which they'll be doing as a teamwork.
okay.
I don't know. Pramit is actually in that group which will be looking at this kind of question, but they actually do a kind of a documentary interviews with different experts, and they work on different topics that they choose, which would be kind of relevant for international economic problems.
Oh,
Something like
wonderful. So, the team leader can, get in touch with me, and I can share those data.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
It was Hari's assignment.
that. Yes, basically, they only choose the
Okay.
topics. I just
Okay.
give some
So,
guidelines to choose it. Yeah.
wonderful. This topic they have chosen is very good. That just transition, just energy transition. But there are a lot of issues over here in the sense electric vehicles.
Mm.
Overnight we are going from the fossil to the non-fossil. We are doing a just transition, but we are not thinking about energy poverty issues. We have to see the articulation what's going to happen in Dubai. But this energy poverty issue is quite huge when it comes to the emerging country context. So how we do that on the high table, we need to see. The energy intensity is very high in the developed world. But when it comes to a question of the transition, there's a kind of a peculiar pressure on the developing countries to perform by moving away from the fossil fuels. But that overnight is not possible because it will lead to, this energy poverty issue. So we need to see that. So let's see. So I
Yeah.
can give you some documents related to the just energy transition and the data related to that. And good luck with your project. What's your name?
I'm not sure whether they're doing specifically on that, but probably some bit of, yeah, these kind of concerns would be coming into their assignment, I'm sure.
Okay.
Um,
Who asked
there
the
are many people who are interested in crypto also, I think. Anybody want to ask anything about the crypto policies or tensions in policies in the international, probably the discussion G20, how India managed, was it different from the other countries, developed countries? Some of these things you want to ask about?
Who asked that question, Hari, about the energy transition?
Prameet.
Pramit. Okay, Pramit.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
Abhijit?
Hello, ma'am. Like, hypothetically, say that we might have to scale down production to counter the climate change and all. Like, we might have to do that, no? Do you think that is a worthy alternative to climate change?
What we have to do, what we have to scale down.
If we like, would we have to scale down production or something? Because a lot of manufacturing and all causes pollution. And if the technology cannot replace them with adequate solution, we might have to scale down production. Like, do you think that should happen or
What
something like
that?
that? What is your perspective about that?
No, before me, what is your take on that? You're going, scaling down the production is a way to control the climate change crisis. That global, of course, this climate change is an international public good. So the countries will come together, taking decisions how we can move towards that international public good perspective. So here, three questions are relevant. One is when it's an international public good, the funding, the financing is very important. How you want to arrive at that point of the net zero carbon emissions. Second point is it is also related to the local, it's a local issue as well. It's a jurisdiction specific thing as well. As you mentioned, pollution abatement cost and all will come when we look into the climate change as a local public good issue. So when it comes to the local public issue, one is that pollution abatement cost. Second is like we get into a kind of tax policy which prevent the race to the bottom, because the capital is mobile. So how to avoid that race to the bottom when it comes to the mobile capital? So we will get into the taxation policy. Then the third thing is climate change is also related to the interjurisdictional spillover effects. Like we can't take certain decisions, whether it's air quality or whether it is like the polluting by certain industry, by one particular jurisdiction. For instance, what is happening in Delhi right now. So it has to be, the high table, different jurisdictions, guys need to come together. So that's the way the climate change can be looked into. So these are the broad standard setting functions to look into the climate change question. And within this, at the international public good perspective, what is that you need to look into? What are the policy prescriptions you need to look into as a public good when you get into air quality, the forest cover, different elements of the climate change commitments? What are the things you need to look into? And then third is the individual spillover. So within this realm, your suggestion of getting to the scaling down of the production business, mostly the countries go via the carbon taxation route. We call it as green tax or carbon taxation route. So that's one way in which we can do that. And in India, it was floated from another perspective, like if you import the coal or if you produce the coal or extract coal, a portion of that royalty you pay to the government, a portion was called as the carbon tax. Then after the GST, it was incorporated or included into that GST compensation, this thing and all. But that's a way in which you design the carbon tax for your country. So my answer to Arjun, who asked that question right now,
Abhijit.
my answer to Abhijit is you have to use your taxation path to tackle this issue if you are a fiscal policy maker, rather than getting into the expenditure side, because it is related to the pollution abatement cost and it is related to the quality, air quality. It's related to how industry, the state business relations, and how industries need to behave in containing the climate change, climate related change in risk and uncertainty. So that's one way. The other way is like from the monetary policy point of view, as I mentioned earlier, you need to get into the stress test. Like ask the top investors, ask the top industries to go ahead with the stress test and give you that climate change related concerns, because that affects your financial stability. So monetary policy can go through that stress test part. So these are the quick points I thought that that's a brilliant question.
Thank you, ma'am. It was a nice talk.
Thank you, Abhijit. Yeah.
Mehul, there is another question. Mehul.
Ma'am, thank you so much for this insightful talk. My question is regarding global debt. How is this related to the energy crisis, and is there any relation between the rising individual consumption and global debt?
Yeah. Uh, Global debt, how do you restructure? So let's get into the financing pattern. A country finances its debt, or how they tackle the debt restructuring. The first is you look into the debt maturity structure. Like if you want to trigger the consumption, or if you want to get into a lot of revenue expenditure that is related to the consumption, a lot of such kind of expenditure, if you want to undertake in the economy, you get into a kind of debt maturity structure for your country by elongating the what do you call that debt maturity structure itself. In the sense, I will make it little simpler. You have short-term bonds and the long-term bonds in the debt market. So if you get into the short-term bonds, then your refinancing risk is very high. So you get into the long term, so that there is a simultaneous selling and buying of bonds in such a manner that you get more short term, more long term, and less short term. So your refinancing risk is postponed. and you can get into a lot of revenue expenditure related, spending, revenue expenditure related components, and that's very well taken. And there is a relationship between these two. That point is very well taken. So one is elongation of the debt maturity structure. Second is you have to ask the question whether it is internal or external. And if the debt is more external, then you have to face that what Sri Lanka and Pakistan faced. Their fiscal space was quite populist. They were using that borrowed money or the borrowed from the external agency, not for a kind of capital formation, but they were getting into the consumption related populist policy measures. So the debt was mounting. So now they are into trouble, but India will never become that small island economy type because we are very diverse. Our financing pattern of deficit, if you look into the debt, it's not external, it's internal highly. So we won't get into that Sri Lanka board in which they have gone, mindless, gone ahead with the mindless consumption-related populist, measures, and that led to their debt burden. Then, you can also think about this climate change-related crisis and how can that get into this debt domain, which I mentioned earlier, that you can float green bonds, you can float the infrastructure-related bonds by linking a green element to it. So if you ask me, there is a link. Of course, there is a link, and but you can tackle in a way in which you tackle the financing pattern of deficit and also through the maturity pattern of your debt market. So that's a way you can tackle.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. And I'm just kind of memorizing your names, like after Ajit, Abhijit, who asked the
Mehul,
debt?
Mehul Goyal,
Mehul Koyal.
Mehul. Yeah,
So we,
yeah,
students outside Kerala.
yeah, yeah. Of course,
Oh, okay.
more than 50%. Yeah.
Okay, and Megul came from Northeast.
Mehul, where
I'm
are you
from
from?
North India. I'm from Uttar Pradesh.
You're from Uttar Pradesh. Okay, Megul Coil. Okay, okay.
Any other questions? Is it this green financing is becoming quite famous now? I mean, is it kind of same for every countries? Just like gender budgeting, it was kind of emerged in the early decades of 2000. Now the green budgeting is actually taken up by all the countries. Quite interesting. I mean, or it's only by the mostly developed countries. I mean, I'm sure there is a kind of international pressure for this. So, all the countries are actually on the same way of dealing with this, or what do you feel when you actually sit in the international discussions?
In the international forum, many countries committed to it by opening a budget tagging methodology. Many countries are towards, moving towards this fiscal transparency for energy, this climate change commitments. But the question is, they don't know how to do that through the analytical metrics and through the institutional design. And now they are talking to the experts who have done gender budgeting. Because now gender budgeting, that institutionalization has happened. But climate related that expenditure that is highly fragmented. So now they're having conversations with the center budgeting experts how this can be taken ahead as a public financial management tool to ensure the accountability process. So if you ask me, all the countries, no. Only a few countries have gone ahead with that. Even within India, we don't have a climate responsive budgeting statement within the expenditure budget of the union government. But at the same time, the state governments, like if you look into Bihar, if you look into the Orissa, they have done a kind of the climate related budgeting statement as a PFM tool, public financial management tool for accountability. So now the pressure is high that we need to do that because this fiscal transparency is very important for the fiscal accountability. So now the pressure is very high, but even the countries or the states which have done the climate related responsive budgeting, they have looked into only the financial inputs. But in gender budgeting, we have done the fiscal marksmanship also. In the sense, fiscal marksmanship relates to the credit budget credibility question, like the promises you make on gender development or the promises you make on the climate change related commitments by the government, those promises were not translated into actual spending. So that is a question of fiscal marksmanship. So the climate, if you ask me, if there is a statement related to that, of course there is a statement, but the statement related to the budget credibility as the PSM tool, that's not there. It's partial, but for gender budgeting, we have done that budget credibility exercise as well by looking into the question of what is the difference between the promise and the reality. Like the students, if they are interested, they can check this question, like getting into the randomness and the biasness of fiscal forecasting errors. Like you get into the
I think you lost, we lost your audio. Are you able to hear others?
No, sir.
No, I think there's some problem with the audio. Just now we lost it. Maybe you can just rearrange it probably.
Am I okay right now?
Yeah, fine, yeah.
Okay, how it's happening, I don't know.
You didn't touch it, but somehow.
God, I'm talking about randomness and bias. This is beyond the purview of the policymaker. That's a statement I was about to make. Like, if the forecasting errors are random, that's beyond the purview of the policymaker. But if it is biased, then we can change the models and correct it. So, am I audible right now?
Yes, very much. Yeah.
Okay. So that question of fiscal marksmanship is also very crucial when we talk about this PFM tool of the climate change commitments. Like the first question, you just map it. You just take the analytical matrices and map the different components of adaptation and mitigation. Once you map it, then you take a look into the fiscal forecasting errors related to those components. And if there is a forecasting error, you get into the question that what is it like, whether it is due to randomness or whether it is the biasness or variation. So there is a methodology, and we have a paper in NIPFP to look into these questions. So
Okay.
your friends can take a look into that paper by Pinaki Chakraborty, Lekha Chakraborty, and Russell Feshta. We have looked into this question. Now the third question is how to link the resources to resource, like net zero, how the budgetary resources are linked to that. So that question is very tough, like the performance linked budgeting or outcome budgets. So then the outcome measures, how do you do the measurements? So these are the questions. So these are the different ways in which you can ask a question, and that's the way in which the gender budgeting question was looked into. I was looking for my book, but I cannot show you because I have mounted my
That you're using
so I cannot take the book right
using
now.
book as a base for your mobile. Yeah.
But Hari can show them the Palgrave Macmillan book.
Sure. The first book. Yeah. I'll definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a. Yeah. I think I have it probably in my office. I'll see that.
Okay.
Aditya, you have a question? Then probably we will wind up with this question because it's going to be 8. Aditya, yeah, you can ask.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you, ma'am, for the wonderful presentation. I had a question regarding the climate change action plan taken at the G20 summit, the meet. So, like the countries have pledged towards tripling their renewable energy by 2030, if I remember correctly. So, how would they address the issue of fairness with regard to developed and developing countries, let's say,
That's a
their responsibility?
that's a question because the political economy of the national adaptation communication by India, because we were a part of that what do you call the steering committee. I was a member of that steering committee. I was privy to those discussions, but now it's all open. It's published, but our political economic question or the economic diplomacy question on the high table is the sources of financing this climate change commitments. Of course, we have our own, internal financing, but when the energy intensity, there is a huge differentials, as you mentioned, when there is a widening disparity in the energy transition between the developed and developing countries, the political economy question asked by India is that where are the external sources of financing? So that transformatory sources of financing was the question. Then, in that game, climate-related bonds, that's quite a small tool. It was nothing in front of thinking big about the climate change commitment. So it is inconclusive. The statement is inconclusive. We need to have more deliberations, and maybe in the coming Dubai meeting, we will have more clarity regarding that. But otherwise, there was no clarity regarding that political economic question about the sources of financing. So we need to look into that. But one question about just transition, which was made clear, was the question, related to that energy poverty. Like overnight, we can't do that because we don't have even any clear natural resource taxation in the country. So when it happens, it relates to state business relations. In the state business relations, so how do you tackle this issue? Then the multiplicity of the taxes will come into picture. Then the corporate sector, the industries, the business world, they are not in a mood to do this multiplicity of the taxes to tackle the climate change commitment. So I work with Tata related to this extractive industry. Then they told that we are paying royalty. On the top of that, now there is a climate change concern. We have CAMPA, we have multiplicity of the taxes. So how do you tackle this? Because if you extract a lot of money from the state business relations, from the business world, after a point of time, the augmentation of revenue from these sources, when there is multiplicity of taxes, then the augmentation of the revenue, that is going to be declining. In a way, it's a laugher curve. Like beyond a point, things will not work, even if even if you articulate that a lot of things can be, things will happen from the taxation part. It will not happen beyond a point. Laugher curve of it. So there are concerns related to the international forum. There are concerns related to the state business relations and also the fiscal policy. Through expenditure side or the taxation side, you're going to take up this issue. And now the final point is ecological fiscal transfers. That's a way we invented another, that's a fiscal innovation, invented another path to tackle these issues. So we need to wait and see if to get a clarity related to your question from the Dubai meeting, maybe 2 weeks ahead, we will be able to know how they are going to maneuver the just transition that developed and developing countries. So these are, the matters of concern, but we don't have any clarity related to that. India has not yet got into even the JET-P, just energy transition, because there are problems related to off-grid, on-grid power sector. So we have to reach a consensus related to these articulations before we promise that we are getting into this JET-P, partnerships. So we have to see how this just energy transition happens.
Thank you so much. I think it's wonderful to have this discussion. I think we are getting more theoretically informed as well as policy-wise informed. I think you are the person who can talk about both the ways, and I'm sure students also got very much benefited out of it. I hope it's okay if we get in touch with you in case of any specific group has any something relating to this, the budgeting part and the financial fiscal policy part. If they want to ask any questions, I will be forwarding it to you to get your opinion on that.
Sure, I'm willing to do that, and I already got requests from students. Can tell those names. I got requests from Gayatri. I am yet to respond to Gayatri's concern, and I got a request from I forgot the name. I got 2 requests already, and I'm working on their questions. I got the questions and brilliant.
Oh, okay.
Questions. Yeah, brilliant. Okay. And they also requested me to come for a video.
That's right. That's right.
With them. So the students are like very proactive, and I'm very happy about it. And tell Gayatri that I will be answering her questions. And another team, I forgot.
Yes, one team actually wanted to meet you. If you're actually coming offline, they want to have a discussion with you. But I told that you're coming online, so they are actually kind of disappointed. So I'm sure you can have some discussions over phone or probably on, because it's a documentary, so they may want to video shoot you when you're actually talking. That's what they wanted to do. But, but let's see. Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much, Echi.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, and I would definitely calling you for a institute talk very soon, because this is just a lecture for the humanities collective. We have a humanities collective here, and for the class, humanities collective is basically looking at the issues in economics and sociology and political side. Most of the students are science students, so we are actually probing them to think about something on that side, non-scientific, issues which would be interesting for them. So this is for the class international economics. I think they are hugely benefited, and we will get back to you for a detailed offline talk very soon. Thank you so much.
It's my pleasure. All the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Yeah. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, ma'am.